Hey guys, welcome back to Reserved Investments on YouTube, and welcome to part one of the finale of the 3,000 subscriber Q&A series. I think that deserves a round of applause, given how long it's taken me to finalize this particular Q&A series on this channel. Now, to be fair, for the uninitiated out there, every time this channel reaches a 500 subscriber milestone, I do put out a video where I solicit in-depth questions from my viewing audience, and I take the time to answer all their questions on camera. Well, as a result, as this channel has grown, you can imagine how many questions I get asked with 3,000 subscribers. So as a result, it has taken me a long time to go through and answer these questions on camera. So this is part one of the finale of the 3,000 subscriber Q&A series. Part two will drop within the next 7 days here on YouTube, so please watch for it. So we're going to get right into it. We got a lot of questions to answer, and a lot of these questions are very interesting and unique, and I like that. They cover a plethora of collecting categories and topics, all for your viewing pleasure. First question, Sean, I personally am a 1990s Nickelodeon fan. Have been raised on shows such as Rugrats and Hey Arnold. You are bringing back memories here, my friend. With the recent reemergence of 90s nostalgia and 1990s Nick in particular being popular once again with 90s kids, will that be a market worth investing in for things such as merchandise and memorabilia from that time period? First, let me tell you, I love 1990s Nickelodeon. I was a huge fan of Snick, Nickelodeon at night on Saturday nights when they had Clarissa Explains It All and Are You Afraid of the Dark? I used to watch that well into high school, my friends. I also was a huge fan of some of the lesser known shows that premiered on Nickelodeon. I'm going to give you one to Google. This is very esoteric. There was a show that only lasted 2 seasons called 15, and it dealt with high school drama. Kids who were either had their parents who were getting a divorce, or they were dealing with an issue where they liked a guy or a girl that didn't show any interest to them. Well, Nickelodeon actually did a series that was meant to be taken seriously in this particular high school setting, and it was called 15. The show, in my opinion, was a little bit corny, but it was well done for this particular time period. If you ever want to Google that and you want to watch some of those episodes, I did enjoy watching them. It kind of really tugged at the heartstrings of that 90s nostalgia like you're mentioning here, but I just want to put that out there just so that you know where I'm coming from, because I'm a huge fan of 90s Nickelodeon. That being said, this market, unfortunately, is too niche. The market is not right for investing in at present time, with few exceptions. So I would not advise you to go after any of these collectibles or vintage t-shirts that came out of this particular era, unless if you're buying them to flip right away on the market. I would not buy this stuff at market retail value and attempt to hold it for 10 to 20 years, thinking it's going to go up in value. The market for this stuff is very, very small and niche. Just because right now, this particular market is seeing a reemergence because people my age and younger who grew up with this stuff want it in their lives again, does not mean it's going to exponentially continue to rise in value on the secondary market. In most cases, in my opinion, the easy money has already been made. Now, if you have access to getting like a prop, like let's say that you're like me, a huge fan of Clarissa Explains It All, or Are You Afraid of the Dark, and you happen to be able to get a prop from one of those shows that is well known, and maybe you're only paying a couple $100s for it. If you want to take the risk, take the risk. But just know that's a very esoteric market. If you're going to sell that particular item again, whether it be 6 months, 5 years later, you pretty much have to find somebody else that is a huge fan of that particular show where that particular prop came from. So that's one of the risks of investing in this market for either the short term or the long term. So I hope that helps. But I hear you, brother. I'm a huge fan of 1990s Nickelodeon as well, believe me. Next question. Sean, my brother is beginning to look at modern CGC graded comic books for collecting purposes, mostly 1985 and up issues. He can't commit to purchasing any as he's afraid of overpaying. What's one piece of advice you would offer to a new collector of modern graded comic books? And what's one resource you would recommend for him to start learning? I would tell him, honestly, that his strategy is flawed if he's doing this from an investment standpoint. Unless if he knows really the market in general, how to grade, he has his pulse on the market, and he's going to flea markets, he's working his butt off going to garage sales, he's putting ads out there, and he's offering to buy post-1985 or comic books in general, and he's buying them at below market prices, either selling them on the market, meaning flipping them, or sending them to CGC, getting them graded, and then selling them. That's really the only way he's going to make money in this market, in the short term, and even in some cases in the long term. The money for vintage comic books is in pre-1975 comic books. Making money in the post-1985 comic book world can be difficult over the long term. Over the short term, yes, a blind squirrel generally finds nut. It's not too hard to make money in some of these markets without even trying, because right now, the collectibles marketplace is on fire in the year 2020, post-pandemic crash, whatever we're referring to this. So as a result, you can make money in the short term. The problem is, if he wants to get into this market, learn from it, and hold these items for the long term, he's going to want him to get into pre-1975 comic books. Now, there are some exceptions to that rule. If he had the money to go after a first print copy of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, a book like that, that would be something that I would consider an investment grade blue chip collectible for the next 10, 20 years. But he's not going after that, judging by how you're wording this question. I've said this before. I do not like books like Walking Dead 1 and Amazing Spider-Man 300. And I don't care. Every time I bring that up, I lose subscribers. I don't care. The fact of the matter is, books like those are speculator traps. If you chart the price appreciation, the price falls of those particular books over the last 5 years, I'm sorry, you are going to see the market is anything but stable. They're speculator traps. That's why I don't like items like that over the long term. Now, if he wants to get in that market, he wants to short-term speculate in those books, by all means, I wish him all the best. What I will tell you is, have him avoid a lot of these collecting forums. If he goes on the CGC comic book collecting forums and he starts hanging out in the Copper Age forum or the Modern Era comic book forum, he's going to meet mostly nothing but speculators who are going to tell him, oh, this market's great. You should go after this book. You should go after that book. Well, guys, I hate to say it. There's a reason why a lot of these people spend all day, every day on some of these forums. Do you understand what I'm getting at? There's a reason why their advice is free in that manner. That's why I said this is not a hype-filled channel. If this was a hype-filled channel, I would be edging on your brother right now. I'm not doing that. I'm trying to instill in him knowledge of the antiques and collectibles trade, along with knowledge of economics and finances. In my opinion, he would be better off going after pre-1975 comic books and learning the market that way than once he has the market down pat, where he can at least see what an established market looks like, he can then transfer over to the more speculative side of that particular marketplace. That's not to say vintage comic books are not speculative. Not what I'm saying. Don't misconstrue my words, critics. What I am saying is, though, the market for pre-1975 books is more established overall than the market for post-1975 comic books, if that makes sense. Hope that answers your question. Next question. Sean, have you ever watched the show Collector's Call on MeTV? I can't imagine you not at least having an awareness of it. I personally do not like it due to the lack of representation and diversity displayed on the show. But if you have seen it, what do you think about it? Particularly, what do you think of the experts they bring in and how they value the items presented? Well, full disclosure, I did watch about 3 episodes of this particular series. I think they're on season 2 or 3 by now. I do want to spend some time watching the full series, meaning I would like to see every single episode at some point in the future. It's just my time is very sparse right now. I can tell you the host of the show is the wonderful actress who played Blair back on the 1980s sitcom known as Facts of Life. So I was always a fan of her character in that show back in the 1980s. The Facts of Life was one of my favorite sitcoms. So was, full disclosure, Silver Spoons. and Different Strokes. Those particular shows I consider extremely iconic from the 1980s. Well, as a result, when this show first premiered, Collector's Call, I was very excited because I wanted to see what she looked like now that she's in her 50s. She's no longer a young spring chicken like she was back in the 1980s. So that's really what got me to tune into this particular show. I do like the show. Notice I did not say love. I like the show. I agree with some of your criticisms. I will also say I do not agree with a lot of the experts that a lot of these collecting shows bring in. Now, to be fair, we don't know what's happening behind the scenes on this particular show. Just like we don't know always what's happening behind the scenes on American Pickers or Pawn Stars or even Antiques Roadshow for that matter. That said, I'm still willing to give the show a little more time to develop because I'm going to be very honest. Hopefully this show will last more than 3 seasons. But 3 seasons really isn't enough time for me to assess and analyze this particular series. Most of these series that deal with collectibles, I'm going to be very honest, they come and go. Most of them don't last more than 2 or 3 seasons at best. If you look at Toy Hunter I think lasted 4 seasons, and then it pretty much died out. Now, that was also due to the fact that I believe, and I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, but I believe Jordan Hempro at that particular point also didn't want to do the show anymore. And also at that particular point, the Travel Channel saw the ratings decrease for Toy Hunter to the point where they said, you know what, we'll agree with you. We're not going to renew it. We're just going to walk away. So most of these collecting shows are not like Pawn Stars, American Pickers, Antique Roadshow that are pretty much going on for decades on end at this particular point. So it'll be interesting to see what becomes of this show. That's what I will state. Because I can name a lot of reality television shows that you can watch right now on Amazon Prime. If you want me to name some, I will. $1 Million Auctions is one of them that deals with Morphe auctions. There's one, I forget the name, that deals with Rich Penn auctions. And if you have Amazon Prime, all these shows you can watch for free. Well, most of them only lasted 1 or 2 seasons because, in all honesty, they really weren't that original and they weren't overall that good. It was more created to hype up demand for the auction house in question. And that's not an insult. Both Rich Penn Auctions and Morphe Auctions are great companies. Really, they're very reputable in the trade overall. But you got to understand, when an auction company wants to get into a reality series, there is a reason behind it. It's usually to create hype and demand for the markets that they serve. So that's my problem with most of these reality shows. Even American Pickers. American Pickers, in my opinion, is one of the best reality television series out there that deals with collectibles. So is Antiques Roadshow. The problem is, some of them overhype the markets that they serve. That's why right now, when I do like videos on vintage advertising, Coca-Cola memorabilia, Pepsi-Cola memorabilia, even Tobacciana, even vintage alcohol advertising, all that stuff is in a massive speculative bubble due to the fact of what these reality collectible TV shows brought to the market. When American Pickers premiered back in, 2011, 2012, it ushered in a lot of high-profile collectors and investors that wanted to invest in those particular items. And that's why even to this day, literally 8-9 years later, the market's still going strong for vintage advertising, vintage Harley-Davidson, motorcycles and parts and the like. So that's my problem with a lot of these reality shows. They inadvertently cause a speculative bubble in a lot of these markets. Same thing happened with Toy Hunter back when it premiered in 2012. A lot of people before that show premiered didn't know what a vintage prototype rocket-firing Boba Fett figure was. It was that particular show that pulled that particular item out of the darkness and threw it into the limelight. And back when that show premiered, you could have bought that particular item for like less than 15, 20 grand. Well, today, if you want a rocket-firing vintage toy prototype figure, you're going to pay 100 grand at least on the market today, especially if it's graded by AFA. So that's some of my criticisms on a lot of these shows. Next question, and that was a very good question, by the way. Sean, do you believe emulation and remakes of video games affect the prices of the original release of the video game? Yes, I do, and I have a lot of critics that try to attack me on this point. What they are missing is the video game marketplace right now is not an established market in the antiques and collectibles trade. It's too speculative. It's too new. We don't know where it's going to be when the dust settles, literally 10, 20 years out. And to put that in perspective, I'm going to be 44 years of age in this December, meaning December of 2020, I will turn 44. I am not going to wait 20 years so I can come back and say to my critics, look, I told you so, or hey, look, you were right, I was wrong. You know what I mean? I'm not going to get involved in that argument. What I will tell you is there's examples on both sides of the equation where if we look at what happened when the Super NES Classic was released in the store shelves for $79.99, a lot of the original games, the cartridges that made up the games that were on that particular unit, fell in value because the average person out there who wanted to play Chrono Trigger or Earthbound or Star Fox or Super Metroid, all they had to do was go to their local Walmart, Target, pay the $80, and they can get a Super NES Classic that had all those games on it. Again, guys, just because somebody is buying a vintage video game or a modern era video game, it does not make them a collector. This is something that I argue against with a lot of these Timmys and Poindexters out there that come into these markets and they think, Sean, you don't understand. Look at how many units Nintendo sold of the Nintendo Switch. Or look at how many units Sony PlayStation 4 sold overall on that console's lifetime. All those people are going to be collectors. It doesn't work that way, guys. A collector is born. They are not made. And a collector that is born, even if they like video games, doesn't mean they're going to gravitate towards collecting video games. You must understand the nuances as to what goes in on somebody growing up and becoming a true collector, meaning a hardcore collector. I'm not talking about your casual guy that just wants to go back and buy a used Nintendo Wii because he had it back in 2006. It's now 2020, 14 years have passed. He wants to recapture his youth of that time. So he goes to the market, he buys a Nintendo Wii with a couple of used games. A lot of you guys try to argue with me that that guy's a collector. That guy is not a collector. Chances are he's going to buy that item, he's going to play it for a couple of months, then it's either going to end up in a box in his bedroom, in the attic, in the basement, or it's going to be sold at the next yard sale, or he's going to list it on eBay, and he's never going to come back to video game collecting again. That's the reality of these markets. When we compare collectible markets to that of Wall Street, to that of the financial asset range, they are very, very minute. They're very small. Why do you think I do so many videos where I talk about coin collecting in the 1980s when there was a massive speculative bubble when coin grading premiered and Wall Street wanted to get involved? It never works out. Wall Street should not be involved in the collectibles marketplace, and they should not be peddling collectibles to the average investor out there. In order to invest in collectibles, you must have an understanding of the antiques and collectibles marketplace, along with a fundamental understanding of economics and finance. If you're lacking any of those components over a long enough time horizon, you will lose. Why do you think I tell people, you want to make money? You want to build wealth over the long term? If you're not a collector, if you have no desire to learn these markets, you don't even have to watch any of my videos. Just go out there, get yourself an S&P 500 index fund, and every week, every month, put a portion of your earnings in that fund, and over 10, 20, 30, 40 years, you will have something. I guarantee it. It's been that way since the creation of the stock market at large. It'll be that way going into the future, whether Trump wins the presidency, whether Biden wins the presidency, whether Bernie Sanders comes out of nowhere and becomes king of the United States, that some of you guys worry about. If that happens, I got news for you. The overall economy and the financial structure contained within the United States and the industrialized world will still exist, and it'll still go on as it is today, guys. It's not going to collapse. The ruling class, the political elites, the billionaires that control our political system and financial system will never allow that to happen. I assure you, there's going to be bumps along the road, but the financial system will never, ever collapse in the United States as long as I am alive. Because if you would argue that it would have collapsed in 2008 and 2009, and they did not let that happen. And what happened in 2008 and 2009 was worse than what happened in 2020 with the little corona crash. Okay? Not going to get into a rant on that. I'm going to end your question here. It was a very good question. But again, video game collectors are analyzing the market incorrectly. It is too new. You can't come up with all these ideologies, with all these dynamics of the market, because the market really only took off since WATA came into the market and started grading these games. And that market was not fully organic. It was manipulated. That's why I spent so much time doing videos where I talk about the dynamics of the video game marketplace, understanding WATA games, understanding all these auction companies that are now attracted to a lot of these video games because they're selling for exponential amounts. That's an example of market manipulation. Is there organic demand there? Yes, of course. I'm not saying video games are going to go to zero. I'm by no means arguing that. But it is by far not an established market as of yet. Next question. Sean, you may have touched on this in past videos, but can you tell us your thoughts on vintage Star Wars and vintage G.I. Joe figures concerning the carded bubble deterioration over time? I have sold off most of my carded figures due to the bubble cracks and breaks as I stay away from buying them now. What are your thoughts? I've said this before. Vintage toys in general, especially vintage toys from the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, even early 2000s. These particular products were not meant to be held indefinitely and coveted as collectibles and investment pieces. The plastics they used, the products they used to create a lot of these toy lines, whether we're talking vintage Star Wars, modern era Star Wars, G.I. Joe, Masters of the Universe, Transformers, Battle Beasts, the materials that they used will break down over time. All of these carded action figures are pretty much like a time bomb that's going to eventually go off. It doesn't matter whether they're AFA graded. It doesn't matter how they're stored. None of that matters in general. At some point, yes, you are going to encounter bubble deterioration. You're going to encounter yellowing bubbles. You're going to encounter cracked bubbles. The tape that holds a lot of the weapons and accessories for some of these individual figures and products is eventually going to dry out. When that happens, even if the item is AFA graded, which, by the way, I love AFA. I think they're a very reputable grading company. But even if the item is AFA graded, it's going to affect the value. That's why if you're getting into this market and you're logging on to Hakes, I'll pick on Hakes for a minute here. Hakes is a great auction site, in my opinion, if you are looking to collect vintage toys. But you really have to look at the listing, and you also have to look at the toy in question, because if you see an AFA 85 plus Star Wars figure that's listed and the bubble is starting to deteriorate and it's not listed on the AFA label, guess what? Most likely that happened after it was graded. So you must be very careful if you are getting involved in this market. Full disclosure, between the years 2015 and 2018, I sold off my complete collection of vintage toys. Even vintage space toys and robots from the 1950s and 60s were also sold off, just due to the risk of deterioration. And I also did lose money in some of these markets, because if I bought a figure and I even put that figure in a dark place, I kept it out of light, it was in a climate-controlled area. If I went back to that figure, some of them, I noticed that the card was starting to come away from the bubble. And that actually costed me a lot of money when I did go to sell off that collection. There were certain pieces that were damaged and destroyed. So I do not recommend anybody getting into that market long term. I'll tell you another market that is also in that same vein. Sneakers. I had a chance finally with the quarantine, with being stuck at home these last couple of months. I finally got to watch Sneakerheads on Netflix, and I did enjoy the series. I thought it was a fun, lighthearted series. It wasn't great. It wasn't bad. It was good. It was worth watching for how many few episodes they did on it. Well, a lot of sneaker collectors are starting to learn this the hard way. Sneakers, especially Nikes from the 1990s, early 2000s, people who bought those particular items and kept them in pristine condition are now seeing in the year 2020 that the plastics and the products they use to manufacture those sneakers, they're starting to deteriorate. So that market is very, very risky over a long time horizon. Now, if you happen to go to a flea market, if you happen to come across a vintage pristine pair of Nike sneakers, or for that matter, a carded vintage Star Wars figure that you know you can flip and you can make easy money on, by all means buy it. But let the guy who's buying it from you worry about long-term storage and care of that item, because most likely it's not going to work in his favor. So that's how I'm going to end your question. That was another good question. Next question. Sean, does the high influx of comic collectors into the video game marketplace signal a collective acknowledgement of saturation and or a perceived lack of interest in paper comic books for future generations? No, the problem that future generations have when it comes to paper comic books is the fact that they're no longer in the public eye anymore. Think about it. Kids today aren't hanging out at newsstands. Even if they go to Barnes & Noble, there's very limited amount of comic books for sale at bookstores. Most people are buying their books online, which doesn't bode well for stores like Barnes & Noble. And complicating things is the only way that these kids are getting exposed to modern era comic books is at specialty comic book shops, which are dying out in the year 2020, let's be honest, and also comic conventions. Now, to be fair, you can argue, well, little Timmy or little Sally, they go to WizardCon every year, or Wizard World, whatever it's called, and they have a great time. Well, once a year really isn't enough of an influence to get somebody interested in comic collecting, especially modern era comic books, full time, to the point where we can say they're going to become a full-fledged comic collector as a result. So that's what's concerning for the comic book marketplace in present day. It's not so much the fact that video games are taking over, or Magic the Gathering, or Pokemon's gonna misplace all these comic book collectors. That's not true fundamentally. It's the fact that comic books aren't in the public domain and the public eye like they were back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. That's just the way the market is. You go on to ask, are these collectors trying to gain a footing in a more future-proof market? So what you're asking is, are these comic book collectors that are getting into the video game marketplace trying to gain a footing in a more future-proof market? No, I think you're giving them too much credit. Again, I've said this before. The reason why a lot of these comic book collectors are flocking to video games is the way the product was marketed. When WATA came on the scene, they started to utilize the same grading scale as that of CGC. The auction houses that cater to video game and comic book collectors also tend to have a vested financial interest in WATA games. For instance, the owner of Comic Link and the owner of Heritage Auctions have both infused cash into WATA games to make it what it is today. Now, I'm not against that, to be fair. That's just investing. That makes sense for those auction companies to invest in a grading company like that. So whether or not you think it's shady or not, I'm really kind of on the fence on that. Where I am concerned is, again, and I've stated this, when WATA gets involved in the secondary market directly. That's why I've said where I think a lot of these collectors miss the mark is they don't understand that unlike comic books, the market for video games and video game grading was manipulated. It was not all organic. And even to this day, it is not organic in scope. There is some elements of organic collectability. Obviously, there's people out there that do like collecting video games, and those people are drawn to this market. But a lot of the starry-eyed speculators and investors who have propped this market up exponentially over the last few years, they're not analyzing the market properly for what it is. They're giving it too much credit from an organic standpoint, not realizing that the market was manipulated by well-pocketed investors and people like me who are educated in economics, finance. The people that you guys tend to hate on YouTube, they're the people that are manipulating this market. I'm just going to be honest, guys. So that should answer your question in full. Let's go to another question. Let's switch gears and talk about Magic the Gathering for a little here. Hey, Sean, what do you think of Magic the Gathering Secret Lairs? Short term, long term, what's your analysis? Okay, I'm going to answer this in full. Short term, Secret Lairs have a lot of potential. I've made money on Secret Lairs in the short term. Do they have potential long term? I would say it's a lot more unclear. It's very risky, that particular market. If you're going to hold a mass-produced scarce item for the long term, I'm technically against that. What I will tell you is if you are buying Secret Lairs and you can flip them for double or triple the value, by all means, cash out. Take the money and run. Put it in something else. Secret Lairs are mass-produced scarcity on steroids. This is a product that Wizards of the Coast knows is going to sell very well just to the way that it's marketed. I actually was a fan of the Walking Dead Secret Lair, but not for the reasons you may think. I understand it's controversial because those cards can be used in the game Magic the Gathering. I get that. But where I'm a fan of it is, if you look on eBay right now, the people that didn't pre-order that particular item during the pre-order window, they're now willing to pay a premium for it on eBay. So that particular item, rather than going to YouTube and arguing over what the Walking Dead Secret Lair crossover Magic the Gathering item is going to do to the Magic the Gathering market, what you guys should have been doing is going to the Secret Lair website, ordering 10 of those things, and just forgetting about it. Because I'm going to tell you this right now, 2 to 3 months from now, no one's going to care about the Walking Dead Secret Lair effect on Magic the Gathering and the cards in that series. They're going to be talking about the next big thing or the next controversial event that comes up the proverbial pipeline. That's the way these markets work, guys. Nobody's focused on them long term. And Wizards of the Coast knows that. And that's why right now at present time, what Wizards of the Coast is doing, they're pretty much taking proverbial spaghetti and they're throwing it at the wall and they're seeing what sticks. If you look at the direction that Wizards has taken with collector booster boxes, with VIP double masters packs that are selling for $100, they're just trying new ideas that are all borrowed from the sports card market or a lot of these other speculative markets. So just understand that with a grain of salt, that literally over the next several months, it's not going to matter regardless, because the attention span of both Magic the Gathering players, collectors, speculators in general, it's short overall. If you want proof, when I look at the YouTube algorithm of most of these Q&A videos, are you aware if I put out a Q&A video that takes 45 minutes or 60 minutes to watch, most people only watch it for 20 minutes and they shut the video off. That's because I'm not capturing their attention spans for a long time. And that's the norm in a lot of these markets on YouTube and the like. Everybody is after the hype. They want the hype. They want the sizzle. They don't want the steak. The steak to them is boring. And that's why this channel, when you guys tell me, Sean, one day your channel is going to have 50, 100,000 subscribers, I don't believe it, because I'm giving you the steak, when in reality, the YouTube algorithm craves the sizzle. I'm not giving you guys the sizzle. So hope that answers your question, and I hope you enjoyed that comparison on why my YouTube channel will never have 100,000 subscribers. Next question. Sean, what do you think about pre-Columbian artifacts or jewelry from places like Ecuador, Peru, etc.? Thank you for answering this question. You know, this is a very esoteric question. When I read this, I would have loved to know why you're asking this particular question, especially to me. So I'm going to state the question again. I'm going to give you a short answer, then we're going to move on. What do you think about pre-Columbian artifacts or jewelry from places like Ecuador, Peru, etc.? I'm going to be very honest. It is a very niche market overall. It is not on par even with the vintage costume jewelry market from the 1920s, from the 1930s, that is seeing a lot of demand for prices right now on the secondary market as we are in the year 2020. So I don't have anything against this market. Just know it's not speculative driven, which is probably good if you're looking for a market to invest in either in the short term or the long term. So overall, the market, in my opinion, is fairly stable. It is what it is, but it is a niche market. So do not bet the farm or put all your assets in a market like this. Be very careful. That's what I will tell you. But it definitely has legs. So I don't see anything wrong if you're going with after pieces in this particular market. It's just that it's too niche. Next question. Sean, in general, I would like to see comparisons between different markets on your channel, like your analysis of Beanie Babies or even the handbags you talked about. He's referring to Hermes Birkin bags. Just want to clarify that. It's hard to find good information on so many different topics, but I'd like to hear about that and learn from them. Full disclosure, when I started this particular YouTube channel, and now that I'm 34 minutes into this video, I can start being more honest, at least from a personal perspective here. When I started this YouTube channel, I said I'm never going to do videos on Beanie Babies. I'm never going to talk about Cabbage Patch Kids. I'm never going to talk about Garbage Pail Kids. I'm never going to talk about Pogs. Well, since doing these particular videos, I realized that most of my audience, most of my collecting community that flocks to this channel wasn't really either paying attention or they weren't alive back when a lot of these collecting speculative bubbles occurred. So I am starting to do videos on Beanie Babies, Pogs, Cabbage Patch Kids, even Garbage Pail Kids, and give you guys a history of a lot of these early speculative bubbles, because you can learn from those markets and you can apply that logic and reasoning towards what's happening today in the antiques and collectibles trade. So I want to assure you there are more videos planned on a lot of these different collectible markets that a lot of people are not doing too many videos on in the year 2020. I'm also going to be doing videos on Rolex watches, wine, whiskey, some of these more esoteric markets, just to give you enough information to be dangerous if you want to be in those particular markets. Now, do I recommend you invest in wine, whiskey, or Rolex watches? No. Those markets are very, very niche, with the exception of Rolex markets. When it comes to wine and whiskey, you have to be very careful if you're getting involved in those markets because they're highly regulated in certain instances. More on that in upcoming videos. So that was a good question, and I will be doing more videos on those topics, rest assured. Next question, and we're going to go back to video games now. Do you see sealed video game consoles having the same sort of growth potential as sealed video games? Why or why not? Yes and no. Problem is, when it comes to graded sealed video game consoles, the only company that can grade them right now is VGA. VGA does not have the market penetration and saturation that Wata Games does. So as a result, if you're going to collect sealed video game consoles, you should be hoping that at some point in the future, Wata Games starts grading them, because that will give that market a substantial boost. Another thing that I will tell you, when it comes to sealed video game consoles, you do have to use caution as to what you buy, what you collect, and what you choose to invest in. As of right now, everybody's gung-ho, like you said, for sealed video games. Sealed consoles can be a good short-term investment. Let me give you an example. I make a lot of money because I'll go to the market, I'll buy some of these esoteric Nintendo console releases that are done in a limited edition fashion, much like the 2016 Pokemon 25th anniversary 3DS system that I bought from GameStop. Had it graded by VGA. It came back VGA graded in VGA 90 plus condition. I flipped it on eBay for $1,200. So you can make money in these markets over the short term. Long term, it gets a little bit more inherently risky. So just be careful if you're going after some of these consoles and you want to hold them for the long term. I do not recommend that, unless if you get something like a original factory sealed Nintendo action set from 1985 or 1986. That's something that would be considered iconic. So I hope that helps. Next question. Sean, do you think Mario Kart Live Home Circuit will have any future collectability? Honestly, I don't really like a lot of the Nintendo gimmicks, like the, what was the cardboard thing that they put out for the amiibo. What was it? Lobo. I don't even like stuff like that. I think it's too esoteric. Again, I do not like speculating long-term on modern era video games. If you're going to go to the market, you're going to buy a game, and if that game goes from $50 all the way up to $100, in my opinion, you're better off selling it when it gets to $100 and cashing out, putting the money in something else. I do not agree with long-term investing in modern era video games. I don't even agree with long-term investing in vintage video games overall. But the vintage video game marketplace is a little bit, not much, just a little bit better off investing into long-term than the modern marketplace at present time. So I don't have a crystal ball. I can't tell you what's going to happen with Mario Kart Live. I personally look at it as a gimmick. It's Nintendo trying to do something that Nintendo does best in an esoteric market and seeing if it sticks. I do think this will have some appeal because, again, it has the Mario Kart name recognition attached to it. Do with that advice what you will. Next question. Sean, what are your thoughts on all the silver stackers or silver stacking hype on the internet and YouTube? Do you think that this is a good strategy and investment, a hedge against inflation, or is buying gold, bullion, or investing into stocks, bonds, etc. a better way to go? Again, I'm going to do a full video on this, but I'm going to give you my quick answer. If you are worried about inflation, you would be better off investing in mutual funds, index funds, and in some cases, individual stocks than gold and silver bullion. Gold and silver bullion is meant as an alternate asset hedge for somebody who is already financially established. Those of you out there that are putting all your money in gold and silver bullion, thinking that one day the United States economic system is going to collapse because we keep printing insane amounts of money. And I hear you, brother. I hear you, my brothers. I do understand that logic. I get it. National debt is a problem for the United States and other countries. But here is what you are missing. The United States economic system, the financial currency, the fiat system that we use will never ever go to zero. It can't, because the elites, the political parties, and the billionaires all have a vested interest in the financial markets and the market for our currency. They will never ever let it crash or go to zero. And if you want proof, it would have happened back in 2008 and 2009 when liquidity dried up in the financial markets. That's where that would have started. And what happened? Wall Street and the U.S. government and all politicians on both sides of the aisle swooped in and they bailed out Wall Street. And guess what? In the year 2020, they did it again. Now, 2020, what happened with the pandemic was not as bad as what happened in 2008, 2009. I think we all agree on that. However, you must understand that Wall Street, the elites, the billionaire class, it doesn't matter whether you're voting for Trump, whether you're voting for Biden, whether you want Bernie Sanders to become president. It doesn't matter, guys. Whoever is president will always work with Wall Street before the little guy, and he will make sure that the economic system is sound and stable. So those of you out there that are putting all your money in silver and gold, you are really wasting a lot of the opportunity cost and the potential of what that money could be doing for you in other asset classes. Whether we're talking about mutual funds, index funds, real estate, even individual stocks, even individual bonds. There's nothing wrong with putting a small portion of your money in gold and silver. I'm not against that. But some of you guys going on the YouTube, and I watch some of these channels, and I'm just like, the dude's 29, lives at home in his parents' basement, and he just spent $3,000 on silver bullion. Does that make sense to anybody out there? You understand, if you're going to buy silver bullion, you're pretty much going to have to keep it for 10, 15, 20 years, or hope and pray that a financial crisis hits that causes the value of that bullion to rise exponentially. In my opinion, that's a very bad long-term investment. Now, do I invest in silver bullion? Yes, I'll be very honest and full disclosure here at the end of this video, since no one's watching anyway. Back in 2014, 2015, I was heavily buying rolls of American Silver Eagles, United States Silver Eagle coins. I was buying by the roll because back then, in my opinion, silver was an underappreciated asset. Well, today, with the Corona crash, what do you think I did? I sold all that silver when silver prices hit $28 an ounce. Now, I paid anywhere from $14 to $17 for those particular Silver Eagles, if we break it down to the price I paid per coin, because I was buying them by sealed roll. When I sold them, I got $29 for each coin because I got a dollar premium over spot price because they were U.S. Silver Eagle coins. So as a result, I made a substantial amount of money on those particular items. But keep in mind, guys, I pretty much held that particular asset from 2014, 2015, all the way to 2020. That asset, while it was sitting there, did not pay me a dividend. It did not pay me interest. All is what it did was just sit there. Ring a bell, collectors. That's why I caution you guys. You cannot put all of your money, all of your holdings in assets that pay no dividend, that pay no interest payment, that do not do anything but take up space. Be very careful if you are getting into these markets, especially if you are buying into the hype of all these silver stackers, of some of these gold stackers, as to what they're doing. More on that to come in an upcoming video. That concludes part 1 of the 3,000 subscriber Q&A series finale. Thank you for watching. Part 2 will be uploaded soon.